the employee. So I'm not, if I am an employer of labor, I'm not bound to employ you, right? And as an employee, you are not bound to be under my employer. So there's a will part of it, right? And so because of that, I cannot tell you, do 1, 2, 3, and then you will be insulated from a salary cut, right? You can hope that you work in an organization that is forward thinking, that is thinking for all the, looking at a broader scenario, that is not just looking to cut costs, but at the end of the day, as an employee, there will always be that part of vulnerability. So is now, how do I want to manage that vulnerability for myself that it doesn't impact me in the worst possible way? And which is one of the things that Valentine also sort of spoke to, in the sense that, what skills do you need to build? How do you ensure that, you are indispensable as much as possible? And, Valentine was saying something that I understand where he was coming from, but I tend to also disagree a bit, right? In the sense that a lot of people are not productive working from home. I disagree with that, because I have worked in organizations where we didn't just start working from home today, right? Working from home has always been a reality and has always been an option that you could adopt. And that's because the organization has been set up in a way that your objectives are clear. So this responsibility is a shared responsibility, right? So the fact that organizations find themselves in a place where it's like, oh, people are not doing what they're supposed to do. Do people know what they're supposed to do, right? Do you have the right set of people? And that's part of like shared responsibility. So yes, there needs to be a lot of clarity. And how do you give people the flexibility to do that within the reality that we're in? And just like Valentine, I think was being said, that said, we have some peculiarities in Nigeria. For example, I was disconnected because of internet, and I have like 3 internet options. But then it's like my employer can then say, okay, Nifemi, I don't care whether you do this at 9 p.m. when you have light rest. All I know is that by tomorrow or by this week, these are the tasks that I would like you to achieve. Then that gives me the flexibility as a reasonable employee to say, okay, how do I want to manage my time? Okay, maybe I'll not have electricity for 24 hours, but within the 8 hours that I will first have it, how do I want to ensure that I'm maximizing my productivity, right? And then, at the times when I am unable to do anything about it, okay, then when I'm able to do something about it, I pick it up again. So as employees, we need to step up, right? So there needs to be that step up of ownership and accountability, and not excuses. So I hear people all the time give excuses, I don't have light, I don't have generator, I don't have solar. Yes, these excuses are valid, but at the times when these things are available, how are you maximizing them? And how are you putting yourself in the place of an employer to think, okay, if I was the owner of the company, what would I expect from my employees at this time? So what I just want to say is that it's a shared responsibility. From a legal perspective, there's not a lot that you can do, right? But then how do we both, from both ends of the spectrum, take accountability of our own responsibility and, put things in place that will help us? So how do we help the employees, and how do we, as employees, sort of help our employer? Is what I would say to that.
Thank you so much, Nifemi. I know you had a lot of things to say, but for time constraints, we need to consider our attendees too.
Sorry, I just want to quickly drive home a point before you move on. Okay. With respect to the Labor Act that Nifemi had mentioned, it was spot on. We're in 2020, but the Labor Act commenced in 1971. So in other words, in 2020, we're dealing with an act that came in 1971, and there's case law to show that act deals with, like you said, blue-collar people. So for executives, administrators, secretaries, what you are only covered by will be your employment contract.
Okay. I'm coming to you anyway. I would like to ask this question. I know it's very difficult to generalize. As a lawyer, you need to deal with issues specifically as relate to you by a client. But yes, I know that a lot of attendees will want to know this. Would there be a difference in perspective in the decisions that will be coming out from the National Industrial Court post the pandemic era? I want you to answer in context of employers who are terminating the employment based on the fact that they can no longer pay salaries and based on the fact that employees are now redundant? How do you see the National Industrial Court formulating policies and making decisions in that regard? Do you see a change in perspective in decision making, or do you see them following up on previous decisions pre-pandemic era?
Okay, thanks, Tomiwa. So I'll try and make this as clear as possible. You're dealing with a court of law, not a court of sentiments. And the court will deal with only facts as presented to it, in a particular matter. Now, the foundation and basis of any employer-employee relationship is the contract. And the cause of action majorly will deal with a breach of that contract. So if, for example, an employee feels that his termination wasn't done in line with his contract, then he believes that he has a cause of action against his employer. Now, I'm making emphasis on the issue of contract because you cannot go to court to say, there's a pandemic, I sacked him, and is that pandemic I'm blaming? No. Is that I was sacked, but clause so and so said, if you want to sack me, this is the procedure. Now, for any employer that uses the phrase, you are being sacked because we have no money and the pandemic has caused it, then the onus is on him in court to prove the pandemic and how he does not have money. So he must say, this is the job I do, this is what the income we get, and this period, this is my bank account to show that I cannot afford this stuff anymore. That onus will be on him. Now, for employees, not to burst anyone's bubble, your cause of action may be limited only to what you would lose. In other words, if you're not giving appropriate notice, so in other words, your month's salary for the period or the notice period in lieu that you were not giving, because it's based on contracts, your salary your cause of action may be restricted to that. I know people have tried to push the envelope by bringing in issues of torts, maybe citing mental anguish, referring to the ILO on protection of wages and the likes. But again, the court will determine based on the contract as between, employer and employee. But the summary is that everything will be dependent on the facts before the court.
Thank you so very much, Vincent. We will proceed straight to the question and answer segment now. We have a lot of questions that have trickled in. I would require people to send in more questions because that is the bedrock of this discourse. We need the questions from you so that we know how to tackle them before we end the webinar. So I will be attending to the first question here on my list. It's coming from Toluwa Leke. Toluwa Leke is asking that it's likely to go to Nifemi. Can an employer unilaterally deduct the transportation allowance from the remuneration of the employee on the grounds that the employee is working remotely? Over to you, Nifemi.
So there should, this is where the concept of contract comes in, and I think also maybe Vincent will need to chip in at the end of my submission, right? So if you have a binding contract, right? If as an employer I want to go against that contract, then I need your consent, right? So how this consent comes about differs from organization to organization. So in some cases, they would require written consent. In some cases, they could have a meeting and say, if you have anything against this, speak up, any of those things. But then on the basis of the contract, if as an employer, you will be doing anything that negates the agreement in my contract, then it needs to be there needs to be a mutual agreement. So I need to consent to it. But the forms that consent takes will differ from organization to organization. It will be very weird if I just wake up tomorrow and then my salary is slashed, right? Without no conversation, without no consent from me. Of course, when the employer has a conversation with you and tells you, this is what it is, these are the choices that we have. You know, we can't pay. If we cannot pay or if we cannot do this, then unfortunately, we'll have to take drastic measures. You know, that's a form of seeking consent. But I don't think that, you know, an employer should just take out your salary without seeking consent from you. And then if at the point where the employer tells you, this is the situation, you know, we need your consent, we are not able to, and he said, no, I'm not giving you consent, then the employer starts to say, unfortunately, you know, then that's sort of like how we might have to review this contract, and that could lead to a termination. So I would allow Vincent sort of drop something to this because he's a lawyer, so he most likely will be able to speak to this. But on the basis of contract, there definitely should be consent.
Yeah. So Nifemi made the point at the beginning that, you know, COVID-19 is new to everyone, and employers have found creative ways of trying to cut cost. But what I've seen in most instances, and based on this question, is that there has been an assumption on the part of the employers that because employees know and understand what is going on, they should know why certain actions are being taken. And that seems to be the flaw. So to answer the question directly, where there's a contract that does not give the employer that kind of unilateral power to vary a contract without the permission of the employee, then that can be done. But I know that some, you know, you may see a simple employment letter that will refer to a handbook, and most employees don't read handbooks. And that handbook may have, you know, that clause somewhere there that they may have the power for certain bonuses to pay at a certain time. So some companies may see transportation as a bonus, not as part of your salary. Some are part of your salary, you know, so it will depend on the fact of, as to one, does the employer have that power? If he does not have that power, then he can't exercise it. Now, if he has that power, is there a procedure for informing the employee? Has he followed that procedure? If all that has been undergone, then the answer is neither here nor there. If the contract says he can do it, he can do it. If the contract says he can't do it, then he can't do it.
Yeah. And I just want to add something to that, to say that one of the things that I believe we will start to see, and I'm sure Vincent and Valentine will agree with me, is that going forward, employers will start being specific about these things in the contracts, right? So contracts will start containing clauses that say, in the event of a pandemic or in the event of this, you know, we would have to take decisions unilaterally or specifying the procedures. But until that is sort of stated in the contract, the employer should not take that kind of decision without consent. So the counsel is review your contract. Whatever is in your contract is what determines what the process that can be taken is.
So I was asking Vincent a question. I don't know if he has provided an answer to that question. I would need him to.
Yes, I have, Tomiwa. I provided that. Do you want me to go through it again?
Okay. No. There's no issue since our attendees have heard you. Those are the important people in this discourse. Okay, I will proceed to the next question, which is from Daniel Adewusi. Daniel is saying, what will be the future of work in Nigeria? Do you think some companies may end up moving to remote work completely, even after the pandemic? I think Val has answered that already, but Val, you can just go for 1 minute or 2 minutes. He's saying due to the pandemic. Val.
Thank you. Based on this, like I said, we can't be able to, many companies would, if the remote is paying them more better and it's fruitful and the job productivity is at what they are expecting, yeah, I think it's better you just stay remotely. But if it is not, they have to still come back. But as we are seeing this, it is not static. There's always room for change. So I believe in due course, as this pandemic issue is going or coming, or we are trying to resolve to get a vaccine who can be able to help us eliminate this coronavirus crisis, maybe we can be able to know the future of that. But presently, we are talking about the present state now. Most organization prefers working from home. Mostly the IT, they have seen that has been the future for them, and they are getting their work being done. So it's working for them. But there are some which is not really working for some. Do switching. Today, no work, tomorrow, work from home. So it depends. So for now, we should just try to see how we can be able to imbibe the new culture of work than thinking of the future. The future always comes ahead of everything we all do. But in due course, we have to be working from home for now. Despite the economy is pushing up, depends, and the result is the most important thing we are looking to achieve.
Yeah, Tommy, if I can just add one or two things to what Val has said. From my experience and from an employer point of view, two things that you'll be looking for is efficiency and how to reduce cost. And that will determine the way forward for many companies. I know some of my colleagues whose companies who are in multinationals, and their parent company has told them no work till 2021. Because what they found out is that instead of people being in traffic, for example, in Lagos, somebody wakes up by 6 to get to the office by 8. He can be in his house till 7:45 and start work at 8. And they've realized that his efficiency level has gone up. They've also seen that we don't need this big office where we are paying for diesel cost and paying for XYZ cost, and it's actually cheaper for us to have people work remotely. So companies will definitely be using those two measuring tools, efficiency and reduction, the cost implications to determine what will be the way forward, as they proceed.
Yeah. And maybe I just add a last point to that, because I think this is really critical, right? There's been a lot of conversation from an employer perspective. What is important from an employee perspective, is how do I position myself to represent that future, right? So if at this time when it's like a lot of people are being forced to work from home, you are not really using the time wisely, right? So like Vincent said, transit time is now reduced. So ideally, your productivity should increase to an extent, right? But if instead, you're sleeping in, you're waking up at 10 a.m., you're not getting anything done, in meetings, you're not attentive, all of those things, it's like, then there's a performance element to it. So once a performance element is introduced, then this whole conversation is different, right? So we're talking about what the employer should do in terms of pandemic, but once there's a performance gap, then the conversation is different. So I think that as employees as well, there's a need to put yourself in the position that, represents you to be able to move forward into that future with the organization. Otherwise, then, the organization will move into the future, but not with you as an employee.
Okay, Nifemi and Val, I think there's some issues. Yeah, we can proceed with the questions. I see the questions written in Q&A. I think somebody had wrote, if this whole pandemic continues for the next 2 years, where do you think we stand as a nation and what will be the future of work? Well, I leave that to Nifemi and Val to do justice.
I, for one, hope it doesn't continue, but well, I don't know. Val, do you want to say something to that?
I don't know what to say because nobody hopes for this to continue for so long. But in case anything can happen, nobody can be able to predict the way it's going. If the scientists are, at this point in time, they have not been able to come up with a vaccine, and we have not had a proper preventive measure towards handling this corona crisis. So I don't know for now, but I only know one thing that is going to be perfect: change. And secondly, there's going to be new job descriptions in due course. And lastly, so many new organizations or new names will be heard. The old names shall fall. The new names should be heard. So that's all the only thing I know. But I just expect every one of us, like you said, the transition is a train, a moving train. Anybody who is ready to make a change and is ready to make something doable for himself should go along this transition. There's an opportunity also in this transition. A good opportunity for everyone.
Definitely, I agree. And just to say, I mean, like I said in the beginning, right? We all have not lived this time, right? Especially like we that were on this call. So we've not lived this time. So we can't say, oh, if this continues in 2 years, this is what is going to happen. But then we can definitely say that, people who represent the future would be able to transition faster into that future. And I think Valentine really nailed it at the start, where it's like now organizations will be a lot more critical of the kind of people that they hire, right? So now it's not just about, I have the 2-1, I can do this and I can do that. It's about, do you have the discipline, right, to get up from your bed even though you need to work from home, right? Do you have the discipline to fulfill your tasks? Do you have the accountability to be proactive in sharing what you're doing without somebody having to chase you? So those are the things that will be really, really critical at this time, and not the head knowledge, that was very important before. So while that is still important, now it's people who have character. So I think this is the time to start
building characters. Yeah.
Thank you,
Building
Nick.
new value.
Thank you, Nipem.
Network.
Okay. Because of time, I will need to proceed to the next question. That next question is coming from Anonymous, and it's to Vincent specifically.